And welcome everyone to the Democracy Vouchers panel. You know, we love all policies here at Democracy Policy Network that deepen democracy, but this one is near and dear to my heart. I think it's just such a transformative campaign finance reform idea, and an example is worth 1,000 opinion pieces, and we have an example in Seattle of Democracy Vouchers, and we have two folks who are close to that example, and one folk on the panel today that is trying to spread that to the East Coast. So to begin, we're going to go into the details of Seattle's democracy voucher system and the push for them in New Hampshire and all, but I'd like to start with introductions. If each of you on the panel could take 1 or 2 minutes explaining who you are, what organization you're with, and how you got involved in democracy vouchers, campaign finance reform, and your own story in your own relationship with this transformative policy. And why don't we start with a campaigner for democracy vouchers himself, Estevan.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. Really happy to be here joining this panel. Again, my name is Estevan Muñoz-Howard. I currently work as a senior program officer with the Piper Fund. We're a funder collaborative that supports community-led efforts to build a healthy democracy around the country. We have a particular focus on supporting local and state level efforts. And my particular program area within the Piper Fund is around money and politics reform. But prior to working with the Piper Fund, I was involved in the Democracy Voucher campaign in Seattle. A group of us had been working to advance public financing in the city for several years, eventually culminating in a campaign in 2015, which was a ballot initiative to create a democracy voucher system, the first of its kind, and have been really excited to see it now being implemented. This is the third cycle that is being implemented here in Seattle now, including the mayoral race. And also now in my role with the Piper Fund, supporting other efforts to replicate and expand on this policy in other cities and states around the country. I will just mention that the Piper Fund also does work around judicial independence and protecting the right to protest. And our money and politics work is also more expansive than just public financing. We support efforts around disclosure, transparency, contribution limits, really focusing on structural democracy reforms that can amplify the voices of regular folks and mitigate the influence of corporations in our democracy. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Estevan. And let's move on to Olivia, who is fighting for democracy vouchers in New Hampshire.
So my name is Olivia Zink, and I'm the executive director of Open Democracy and Open Democracy Action. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit organization in Concord, New Hampshire, that is working. Our organization was founded by Granny D. So many of you may have known this 90-year-old woman who walked from California to Washington, D.C. for campaign finance 20 years ago. And she founded our organization with the initiative to pass public financing across the country, but also here in our state. And so we had been working to pass public financing, a system similar to our sister state of Maine or Connecticut, just south of us. And when Seattle initiated their democracy dollars, we changed ours to voter dollars here in New Hampshire to pass a public financing system very similar to that model at a state level. And I think you asked me why I care or what got me involved in this issue. I originally started as an advocate for clean and safe drinking water, and quickly learned if we wanted a safer environment, we had to fight to get money out of politics, and have been in the democracy space for about 10 years. But I think I do this work for my daughter, but also so that we can have a government that works for everyone.
Thank you, Olivia. We've lost Kristin for a second. We'll have her introduce herself when she comes back. But let's jump into questions. So Estevan, we'd love to hear, Kristin is back. Okay, great. Can you hear us, Kristin?
Yeah, sorry, I cut out for a minute there.
No worries, just in time for your intro. So a minute or two on who you are, who you're with, and what got you connected to the cause of democracy vouchers and campaign finance reform.
Sure. Hi, I'm Kristin with Sightline Institute. Sightline is a regional, nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank. So we work here in the Pacific Northwest trying to give decision makers the best information possible for passing policies that really work. And our executive director, Alan Durning, was integral in putting together the ballot initiative and then sort of supporting the initiative and then analyzing the results, especially of the first cycle. And I, at that time, was working exclusively on climate change, but I joke that anybody who works on climate change for more than a decade is going to end up wanting to work on democracy reform. So I actually now spend most of my time at Sightline working on democracy reforms.
Thank you, Kristin. Now on to questions of going deep into this exciting transformative model. Estevan, you were a major campaigner for Seattle's democracy voucher system. Could you start with what is the idea of democracy vouchers, and then go into a little bit of the story? How did it come to be? Tell us some tales from campaigning for it, what strategies you learned of what succeeded, and then what you've seen since it's been implemented in 2015.
Sure. So essentially, democracy vouchers, they're also known as democracy dollars, voter dollars in New Hampshire. It's this, the way it works is that residents receive vouchers, sometimes in the mail, it can be electronic, but vouchers that are worth money. So in Seattle, all adult residents in the city are eligible to receive 4 $25 vouchers for $100 total that they can contribute to qualified candidates of their choice. Candidates, in order to receive the dollars, in order to be able to use the democracy dollars, have to qualify as publicly financed candidates. There's a certain minimum threshold of signatures and contributions that you have to receive in order to qualify. You also have to make some agreements around a certain number of public debates and a few other requirements. But essentially, it's a pathway for residents to have a stronger voice in which candidates and platforms will actually get attention and be seen as viable and have the resources to campaign competitively. And it's a pathway for candidates from the community to be able to have a pathway to raise the kind of money that's necessary to run a competitive campaign. Historically in Seattle, and I will just echo what Kristin said about Sightline's role in all of this. Sightline provided a ton of research that allowed us to make the case for democracy vouchers in Seattle. And so I'm going to lean heavily on Sightline's research when I say that historically, it was only about 8,000 people that were contributing to city council, to the Seattle's municipal campaigns. And prior to this program, it was about 8,000 people, mostly wealthier folks. We found that when Sightline mapped out where those residents lived, they tended to overlap very heavily with wealthier neighborhoods, with homes with views of the water, tended to be folks who were already really heavily engaged in our democracy, who were already voting more regularly, who had more resources. Not a big surprise, but that was really limiting in terms of who can actually participate and feel like their voice is going to be heard. We know so much, we've heard so much about the sort of the silent or the secret election that is held before the actual ballot, which is essentially the donors getting together and determining whose voice is going to be heard. And so we saw this as a way to sort of set a floor for political voice in Seattle, where everyone could be at least a $100 donor. And we paired that with contribution limits that lowered the maximum possible gift. So there was a smaller gap between the largest and smallest gifts that people could make. We felt like that was a means to make the system a little more equitable, make it more feasible for people who are connected to the community, people with the best ideas to run and be viable, rather than just relying on candidates that had the biggest pocketbooks or the wealthiest connections. We came to this model in, I think it was late 2014 that we really started to dig into this. But the campaign itself emerged from a series of other efforts prior to this. So in 2013, there was a campaign to pass public financing in Seattle. It was actually a super match, a 6-to-1 matching system. It was not a democracy voucher program. The city council referred it to the ballot, and a group of us were working on getting that passed. We fell short. We got 49.63% of the vote, lost by about 1,400 votes. But at the end of the day, it performed a whole lot better than anyone ever expected it would. And so the next day, we got phone calls from folks within the state, across the country, asking, how can we build on this momentum from 2013? And it was from there that we were able to bring together some really critical partners. Sightline Institute was a key partner. The Progress Alliance of Washington, Washington Can, Win-Win Network. These were some of our core organizational anchors that helped make this feasible to then be more aspirational about what we might want to achieve. It was from there that we were then able to bring in some national partners who could then help provide some of those resources to get us across the finish line. We built a much stronger campaign. And instead of relying on city council, on what would actually be palatable to existing city council members, we decided to go to straight to the voters, collect signatures, and really pursue what we thought was going to be best for our city. And so it was from there that we had all sort of heard about the democracy voucher model, felt like this was a better fit for what we wanted to achieve, and the rest is history. So it's been really exciting to see the impact there. We've seen, just briefly, dramatic increase in the number of people participating and contributing to campaigns. We've gone from about 1.5% of the city's population contributing to something like 7% of the city's population contributing to political campaigns, which is a really significant jump. We've seen dramatic increase in the number of people running for office. We've just seen a different way of people campaigning to secure some of those votes and to collect those vouchers. And it's made a really significant difference in the political landscape here over the last few years.
Yeah, just to put, stories I hear out of Seattle about this story, in normal fundraising, you go to the rich part of town to throw your fundraisers, get money, and then eventually talk to everyone to get your votes. Under a democracy voucher system, you talk to everyone to get your money and then talk to everyone to get your votes. And you actually see it on their campaign materials. They're sending out emails saying, come to our fundraiser. It's a $25 voucher fee to come to the fundraiser. Or they're going door to door in a neighborhood that's never had a fundraiser before and saying, hey, do you want to give me your voucher if you like me as a candidate?
Yeah.
It's really amazing.
If I could just to build onto that really briefly, I think his one big opportunity that we see here is the opportunity to break the cycle of disengagement that we see. Because oftentimes, to your point, when candidates are focused on most likely voters and the wealthiest donors to contribute to their campaigns, they're ignoring low-income voters, they're ignoring a lot of communities of color, they're ignoring a lot of younger people, which makes it less likely that those people are then going to contribute, makes it less likely that they're going to vote in that election. But when everyone is a donor, it incentivizes candidates to reach everyone, and in doing so, those residents become likely donors and they become likely voters, which then can reinforce that participation down the line. So it's been really exciting to see that as well.
Wonderful. Olivia, tell us a bit about the story of pushing for this in New Hampshire, bringing it to, it's a huge lift to be the first example of something new, but to be the second is where something becomes not a fluke anymore. So what's the push for New Hampshire?
Yeah, and we're taking the local example in Seattle and making it statewide. So really trying to implement what we are calling voter dollars in a system we are calling voter-owned elections, because we want to put the emphasis on voters being the owners of our elections, not the big campaign donors. And so we have been working to build a coalition across New Hampshire. New Hampshire is a red state, so we're not a blue city like Seattle. We're a purple state. But so we're working with conservatives and other candidates to talk to them about why big money's influence has a stranglehold on our local government and why we need to change it. So it's a really different story than what Seattle has faced. We are passing this through a legislative process. So we are convincing our lawmakers, some who benefit from our current system, to change the campaign finance system. So we have introduced this now twice. Last time it got kind of sucked up in a COVID bill that that didn't get anywhere, but we will be introducing it again next year. I do see legislators from New Hampshire who hopefully can help us champion this reform and get it across the finish line and implement it.
Now, what are some common critiques you hear of this? I think there's two different populations you're working with. One is the internal campaign finance reform community, which is like, why is this better than matching funds? Why is this better than, just fighting for more regulations on transparency? And then you get the kind of campaign finance cynics who say, we're all just waiting for Citizens United or Buckley or any of these Supreme Court cases to be overturned. There's nothing we can do. There's nothing you can do at the local or state level. What are the arguments you have in response? How do you pre-butt these arguments in the way you're building your coalition and arguing for this? Kristin, if you're on, if you want to take that. If not, Olivia and Estevan. Kristin dropped out again, so Olivia or Estevan, if you want to talk a bit about messaging.
Yeah, I think messaging is really important, and we did a lot of work around messaging, and I saw Jeff put in a link to our website, and there's an 8-page messaging guide that we developed around voter dollars, so check it out. But what I think the critiques are fair, like why this model over, we're in a state, next to Maine that has a grant funded program. People know about the matching funds program in New York. And really what I say why we're choosing to go a voter dollar route is because it does that same thing. It empowers voters. It changes the incentives. So candidates have to talk to voters. And it gives voters the choice to give their dollars to the candidates that they choose. And so that empowerment happens in two ways of incentivizing and putting the emphasis on voters. And so to that regard, and I think to anyone who says, we can't do anything because we have to overturn the Supreme Court case, I really want to challenge them because, yes, we need to overturn the Supreme Court case, but we need to also work locally to pass robust policies to really refocus the rules so that we're putting voters at the center and not allowing big dollar and big money to control and manipulate our entire system.
Thanks, Olivia. Estevan, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, a couple of things. One thing that we found in our research, and we've seen that reinforced in other cities and states as well, is that this mechanism polls actually pretty well, not just among progressives, but conservatives, really across the political spectrum. And it tends to poll better than matching funds or grant programs. And I think there are real benefits to all forms of public financing. But I think that there is a unique opportunity there, in part because it's a market-based solution. That the candidates that are going to collect the most vouchers are the ones who are reaching more people and telling the best story. And so at the end of the day, it's not like it's somebody else that's making a decision about where those funds go. It really is the residents of the city who are making that call. In Seattle, because of the history here and the way that people sort of perceive politics in the city, we faced some critiques that this is a solution in search of a problem. That was undermined when a developer tried to blackmail a city council candidate who was running in that particular race in 2015. And so that story definitely helped make the case for why something like this would be needed. We also heard critiques that this is welfare for politicians. Why would you want your tax dollars to go to fund somebody you disagree with? One response to that has been that, you might not like your neighbor, but they're still going to be able to use the sidewalk in front of your house. This is public infrastructure, right? Like this is an investment that we can and need to make so that people can have access to our systems and participate fully in not just in our city, but in our democracy. And at the end of the day, the best way to ensure that a candidate that you disagree with will not be using tax dollars that you sort of put into the system is to use your vouchers. You can participate fully and ensure that you're having a say in where that money goes. The last thing I would say is that it's also it was really affordable. One of the challenges that we thought we'd face was that this is going to cost money, and we want to make sure we can get ahead of that. When we did that research, we found that It was actually incredibly affordable. Sightline had an article that talked about this being budget dust. That was sort of that was a term that was used by the city's budget office. And so, you know, for the cost of 2 cups of coffee, the average household could pay for you know, their part for democracy vouchers to be implemented. So overall, it was about $11 for the average home per year. And at the end of the day, we actually led with that. Like, we didn't allow that to sort of be a weakness for the campaign. We started out by saying this is literally the cheapest, the smallest property tax in the city's history. And so we can actually start by saying that, so we can get that out of the way and start really talking about the benefit it would provide.
Thanks, Estevan. And, you know, in some ways it pays for itself, because you have less corruption, you have less giveaways to the rich, you have less kind of tax cuts that are paid for through campaign funds, that in some ways you get some of that money back. Kristin, is there any tips or tricks, or not tricks, but tips or advice you have for people who want to bring democracy vouchers to their state? Our audience is made up of folks who are looking for cutting edge ideas that are big, bold change. And what would you recommend to them for messaging, for building coalitions, for making the case for this type of campaign finance reform?
Yeah, I think what you just said is a really strong point, that if people do worry about their taxpayer dollars, pointing out how much money your city or state spends on things and saying, for, you know, a tiny fraction of that cost, you could make sure that all of that money is being spent really well, because it's being spent in the way that all voters want. I mean, I think another thing that really resonates with people, you know, as Estevan said, this is something that polls really well, because everybody really feels the problem of money in politics. And a way that they really can viscerally feel it is if you ask, hey, do you think that under the current system, you or your neighbor, you know, or your buddy, you know, somebody who you really respect could run? Could they raise enough money to run? The answer is no for like almost everybody. And then you say, well, what if, you know, you have strong relationships in your community and everybody there had $100 to give you. Now do you think you could raise the money? And people say, oh, well, now I could really think about running. And that's really what people care about, is that they, or people like them, are able to run and are able to go and represent them in the halls of power. So I think that this program just speaks to that so directly.
Absolutely to that. And I saw that Olivia put in the chat that Senator Gillibrand, who ran for this at the presidential level, learned about this in New Hampshire, which is one of the things we deeply believe at Deepen, which is it's not only you're fighting for these policies at a state or city level, these truly are laboratories of democracy, and state and city leaders become congresspeople and are on the radar of congresspeople for showing that if you change something in one city, you're creating a precedent that can spread to other cities and states and spread upward. We're at time right now, but we're so grateful to Estevan, Olivia, and Kristin. And one quick announcement, particular to this policy, Deepen is coming out with its first ever book and it's on democracy vouchers by our policy organizer, Tom Latkowski, with blurbs and insights from many people on this panel today. You can learn more at democracyvouchers.org to get the first ever book on this case, and at Piper Fund and the Sightline Institute and Open Democracy New Hampshire, correct, Olivia? So many more information on this transformative policy. Any final words in this last minute for people fighting for this in their state?
I guess I'll plug my book. So Becoming a Democracy, it's 10 solutions that you can do now, and one of them is democracy vouchers, and it'll tell more about the story of Seattle.
Wonderful. Olivia or Estevan, any final words?
Olivia?
I just think that democracy is something we do. All of us do it together, fighting for these policies, learning about these policies, convincing our legislators. And so if anyone wants please be in touch if you want the model legislation we've crafted for New Hampshire. New Hampshire is a unique legislature, so you'd have to but happy to talk through with any policy leaders who want to customize this to their state, because we can all learn from each other and be advocates to really transform our broken government from the corrupting influence of money in politics. And voter dollars, democracy dollars, are truly transformative the Seattle case proves that, and we need to spread this message around the country.
And I'll just say briefly that there's a growing list of cities and states that are exploring democracy vouchers, some form of this. There are folks that are innovating and expanding on the model. It's been exciting to see. We're happy to be supporting a lot of the work that Olivia is doing in New Hampshire as well. And so if folks are looking to bring this to their city or state, I would love to speak with you. So please reach out to any of us, and we'd love to figure out how we can move this forward. So thank you.
Thank you so much, panel, and thank you, audience. This is the last of our policy panels. We move on to strategy panels. So you are now full of ideas of what you need to fight for, and now next few panels are going to be about how you can build power and fight for them. Thank you, Estevan, Olivia, and Kristin. Keep up the good fight.